Welcome back to another Tailgate Talk. Today, it's an exciting one because we get to talk about a dead buck, and a good one at that. We're going to discuss Jake's hunt, your first freaking sit of the year.
Yeah.
Was it really?
Yeah.
First sit of the year, tagged out, slammer.
The first year I haven't hunted opening weekend. First year I can remember not hunting opening weekend. My first sit was on a Tuesday after work because I got lucky and I had to work late on Monday night. So I was able to get off work early on Tuesday night. I actually was given a choice by my boss. So shout out to Zach, thank you. He said, if you're gonna work late Monday, you can either come in late on Tuesday morning or you can leave early on Tuesday evening.
That's an easy one.
Yeah, it's an easy decision.
Yeah. So literally, like you said the other night, the stars aligned.
Yeah, there was everything about it was perfect.
You would have never been in a tree on a Tuesday night.
Ordained by the good man upstairs.
Right.
God bless good bosses.
Yeah.
Both you guys shooting slammers in the first week of the season. You had a meeting with the deer gods and left me out of it. So anyway, I think your success kind of came the Sunday before, so the second night of our season in Ohio, which was warm temperatures, right? Wasn't it like
It's almost
70s?
80.
Yeah.
It was 80, but I think both Saturday and Sunday, because I hunted Saturday night, opening day night, and I contemplated not going back out Sunday because it was supposed to be the same weather, and I hadn't seen much Saturday night. But then I talked to the landowner, and he was like, man, there was some really nice bucks out in my field. So I went back out Saturday night, and that's the only reason I remember the temperature was because of that.
Yeah. Well, Dad and I were out Sunday night, and we just went it was almost like an observation sit. I hate saying that, but it's kind of what it was, I guess. We had hung a stand, never hunted it, hardly hunted this piece. I mean, me and you hunted it last year, like what, twice?
You and I hunted it once. We hunted it twice, once from the ground and then once in a hanging hunt.
It's just to kind of give you some backstory. It's a private piece, and it's a couple hundred acres, but it's basically public.
We call it the public private.
If you want to hunt it, you can go ask him right now, and you're hunting it tomorrow most likely. So There's a lot of pressure there. But Sunday night proved to be very effective. We spotted a really good buck that we didn't know was still around, but we had on cameras throughout the summer. And leading up and fast forwarding to Jake's hunt on Tuesday, he sat in a spot to kill that buck, and it just kind of worked out. And you ended up seeing that buck, which is cool too.
80 yards away, but he was on the downwind side. And if you've seen the video come out already, you've probably seen some of this. Maybe we'll shed some light on exactly what you saw that maybe didn't make sense because we didn't do a bunch of interviews in the tree and stuff. But yeah, that buck came out exactly where we didn't expect him to.
Yeah.
And he fed on gravel.
Well, when you were texting me back and forth, I was kind of like I was bummed, but at the time when we saw that buck, 2 times, I'm like, okay, like we're on to something. We're figuring something out. If we can hunt in here again, or if Easton can come in the next night, whatever, like we have a good shot at this deer. And then, go ahead.
I don't know if that's a fluke, because it was 2 nights that you saw him, two different sits, and you saw him both sits. So you feel like you would have a super good opportunity at seeing him again and maybe even killing him the third try. Once you saw him in a hayfield when you and your dad went and sat it, and then you went and sat and you saw him pop out, not in the hayfield because that's where you were sitting.
Yep.
He came out in an access road, essentially, gravel access road, and fed on acorns. So he did 2 different things, and I went and sat that access road 2 nights after you shot your buck, and he never did it again.
Yeah.
So
I know, it's weird. And it was same wind. The only difference was temperature was cooler.
And it was like almost 20 degrees cooler when I sat it. And he that buck came out like 15 minutes left of legal when you hunted, and it was 80 degrees. And when I hunted that spot, we were both hunting, but there was that cold front that came through, and the temperature dropped. I think it was a high of like 63, and that buck came out at 5:45.
Early, early. It's wild. That's part of the fun is that chess match. And like, why do you do this? Why do you do that? And we don't have any cameras out anymore on that piece, just for the sheer fact that there's so many other hunters.
Well, and there were reports of some cameras being stolen from that property too. So
right. But yeah, from there it was just a wild roller coaster. So Jake was basically texting me saying like, hey, I got him at like 80 yards. I'm sitting there freaking out because there's not a deer anywhere near me. And I'm like, oh my God, he's got to feed down to you because like all the food is your way. I thought there's no way he doesn't, but I was super concerned about the wind.
Yeah,
like you said,
I was too.
Well, not to mention you hear all these horror stories about bucks crossing your boot tracks.
Yep.
And he was literally feeding in our boot tracks.
Well, not just him, but him and another shooter and 3 doe were all feeding right there, right where both of us walked.
Yep.
So we used to do the whole spray down with scent killers stuff, and we don't mess around with any of that stuff anymore. We're basically just either we're throwing caution to the wind because it's the rut and you never know what's going to happen, or we're playing the wind. And so we didn't take any scent precautions. I mean, we had both come from work, so it's not like we actually that shirt that I wore is a brand new shirt. I never even washed it, so it was like whatever it was in the factory is what I was wearing. I didn't clean that shirt at all.
So you didn't take a bath in ozone or anything? Okay, right. Just wanted to clarify. And could you see him from where you were sitting that
No.
night?
So there's just enough bend in the timber that I can't see him. Actually, in the deer, which we'll get to, that he shot, I couldn't quite see yet.
See, that's information to me because here all along I've thought you could literally watch him from where you were sitting.
No, if you fast forward to when, and you can probably see this in the video, I'm filming a different deer, and I notice he picks his head up and looks towards Jake, and I'm like, oh, he's got Jake busted. But he picked his head up because, lo and behold, the buck Jake's about to shoot, which I can't see, is starting to spook, and he's like, what's going on?
Okay.
So that, living in that moment was like, what just happened? Like, did Jake miss, when I saw the deer I was filming sprint off, I was like, did you shoot 100 yards at that deer? like, what's happening? And then I finally see the other one run into frame, and I'm like, okay, that's a giant. That must be the one he shot at. It was nuts. But, yeah, I guess now backtrack since I just said all that. So that big one ended up feeding off, right? You kind of lost sight of him in the timber.
Yeah. Well, and this is interesting to point out, too. And I'm sure that almost every one of you who's watching this video with any hunting experience can relate to this. But your first sit of the season, no matter where it is or when it is always hectic. And let alone adding a hanging hunt for the first time with brand new gear to that situation and a tree covered in poison ivy. You didn't know this, but I'm standing in the tree and I have the tree arm with that big camera wrapped around me. So I'm pushed against the tree because I need to film over there. The weird thing is that I was texting you while filming that buck only 80 yards away. Never once thought about picking up my bow because I thought he's too far away.
Yeah.
It's like there's no point.
Well,
But
that's
at
why
any moment he could have turned and walked towards me and been in range in 3 seconds.
Sure.
I think it's just something with you and getting caught in a pickle with a camera arm because that's 2 years in a row now.
Well, that's why I was just laughing because, he's, 8 feet off the ground, literally surrounded by poison ivy. It just was but those I feel like, and we'll get to this in the next tailgate talk with your hunt, but those just, pardon my French, shit shows.
Yeah.
They end up working.
Sometimes they work. Yeah. Which I think it's worth mentioning. This was you already kind of said it. This was the first time you've ever used that mobile set, which you got for your birthday? Mm-hmm. First time ever using it, and you shoot a giant.
And how about this too? The stand and sticks combination. I had never even attempted to strap all of that stuff together until about midnight, the night before I had to try to hunt that
And
place.
you'll rework how you do that 100 times.
Yeah.
I still haven't found a good way to do it that I'm like, I like that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, doing it the night before at midnight for the first time, yeah, definitely a little chaotic.
I'm sold on the mobile hunting. Especially after that. And looking at Cody DeQuisto, he just killed one 6 feet off the ground. I know we talked about this before, but that element of surprise, I think they've never seen it before.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know. Not that they're maybe not thinking about it. I don't know what it is, but I think it is for sure. I mean, it's been proven time and time again to be effective.
Well, I think too, this is worth mentioning that there's not one right way to hunt. So we have had success repeatedly out of stands that have been in the same tree for 12 years, and it works. It just depends on the time of year that you're hunting. And I mean, the only reason why I killed that buck is if that buck doesn't come out, I don't get a shot at a deer because none of the other deer were in range. Mm-hmm. So mobile hunting is great. I think all it does is improve the likelihood that luck is going to be on your side.
Yeah.
So I think stationary stands are great. I don't think we've all killed deer out of those. It's just a nice additional weapon to have at your disposal. Because if you do need, like with that intel from you guys hunting Sunday night, if you hadn't hunted there, we probably would have gone to that stand. We would have seen those deer a mile away, and then we would have been like, well, we got to go and hang a set somewhere.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. Especially, it's effective. I think it can be effective any time of year, but especially that time of year when there's some sort of a pattern still.
Yep.
If you have a sit where you notice something and you can move in there the next night, I think your chances are outrageous.
Yes.
I like that you put it that way. Yeah, like it's so like you never know when they're about to go to that fall pattern. So you know in the early season like that, if you can adjust very quickly to what you're observing, you increase your odds by like a huge percent. So just like your hunt Sunday night and then the next hunt, boom, he moved to that spot, killed a deer.
Well,
that's big.
That is a key, but I would also say this too. We've done hanging hunts before, but we've never had a true mobile setup with a lightweight tree stand and sticks. We could have just as easily gone and bought a cheap tree stand and some cheap climbing sticks and set those up too, and it would have been a mobile set, just not. It wouldn't have been a tree stand and stick specifically designed to be mobile.
Yeah, it was a mobile set.
It doesn't matter. The tree stand doesn't improve your likelihood of killing. It's the ability to be able to make that move.
Yeah.
You could have made that move with a ladder stand if you had time. You know, like just the ability to react quickly in a situation like that. Like you said, when you know that deer are on a specific pattern, they're more likely to be in that area day in and day out, and your odds are increased that way.
Well, and we were this close to sitting on the ground because that tree was like dang near impossible to get in.
Yeah.
And you got poison ivy.
Yeah, I got poison ivy all over my arm, my hand, my eyelids, my chest.
Worth it. So worth it.
It was worth it.
I don't want to get into my hunt too much, but going into what night was that? Saturday night that I shot my deer. Prior to that, I think I'd hunted 5 or 6 sits, and that was the first time I went into a spot that was already set up. And that was more so dictated by how that property sets up. I would have much rather preferred to hang and hunt. However, where we know the deer bed, how the wind is over that food plot, we kind of had to loop around and sit the set that we already had set up. But yeah, like I'm 100% sold on mobile sets.
I like both. Yeah, I love being like, you know what? It's October. I don't have a deer. I don't have a good buck showing up, but I want to hunt. I'm so glad I have this stand that's already set. I can just go relax and soak in the outdoors. But there's an element of like, it's almost. I feel like I've cussed too much in this video. It's badass to be I'm moving in to kill that deer. Like that's cool. But so after the big one that we were originally quote unquote after fed off,
and he's big too.
He's a nice deer. That it wasn't long after that he popped out, right?
Well, that group of deer fed off. We thought that they might feed off into the hayfield
on the other side,
bean field on the other side where we parked the truck, but. After watching that video back, they just went deeper into the timber. They must have been feeding on acorns, and they were making rubs and scrapes along that path. So
I think they went to that. There's a cornfield on the neighbors. I think eventually they headed out there.
Probably, yeah. So,
and if it helps at all, both nights that I ended up sitting, where you saw that buck over that gravel road, I saw the same exact thing you just described, as all the deer fed from the neighbors across that road and then just down into the timber.
Yeah.
And just not him, which is just crazy. Like, your first sit there the next night when those first deer started doing that, you're probably like, here
I
it comes.
was amped up. Yeah. Like, every time. And it was funny. There was like a canopy. I was almost up in the canopy of the tree, and there was a kind of a big thing of leaves that were blocking the neighbor's property. So I would see the deer's legs before I actually saw their body or their head. So the first deer that I saw that night, I literally think I went to reach for my bow because I was like, it's him for sure. Like, it's a done deal. Like, I'm gonna kill him. So yeah, it was definitely a high anticipated hunt.
Little does Easton know, he hasn't even seen the video yet. That buck was on the complete other side of the field. Gar-holed.
Yeah, gar-holed.
No, we would never do that.
Well, it's your buck now because
go in there. You'll see the rubs. You'll know right where it is.
I did see the rubs.
But so to your point, though, Nick, that group of deer I first saw moving through the timber on the neighbor's property around 5:45. I don't think they actually made it out into that logging road until 6:15 or so. They fed off, and we were texting back and forth trying to figure out what's going on, and I saw up the hill in the exact same spot that big boy walked out for you on Sunday night, 2 nights prior, a doe and 2 fawns start feeding down into the alfalfa and down towards the beans. So as a cameraman, naturally you film the deer, right? That's what I was doing. And thankfully, the camera that I was using has such a great zoom capability that I could get in really tight and see how they were reacting. And they were looking back to their right, my left, hard. You could see them chewing on beans and stuff, but they were looking intently like there was something coming. And I thought, is it a coyote? Is it another hunter? Because there's a box blind right over there.
Which is funny because from my angle, I could also see them doing that, and I'm like, they got Jake pegged. Like, this is over. Like, he's moving, or like, he's 6 feet off the ground. But because, the different perspective, I can't tell exactly where they're looking, and I can't see you. So that's what I was thinking. Like, they're going to bust any second and run right to me.
I think that's another skill that you learn over time hunting is to read a deer's body language.
Yep.
And so, like, the fact that you mentioned that, like, you were watching does and fawns, which weren't of particular interest to you, to hopefully get intel on what else might be out there.
Yeah, and it made all the difference in the world because I never heard him. I didn't see him, but I noticed that they were looking back that way, and so I slowly turned my head, and there he was, standing 35 yards away behind the tree that I was in. I think it was a black walnut tree, but it had branches that came out and draped over me, like almost like a weeping willow or a viney tree, but they were 10 yards out in front of me. All these leaves and all this green foliage. So I was pretty well hidden from that over the top of me.
Which helped and hurt you.
It did both, yes.
At a chip shot, you didn't have a good ethical shot because of those branches, right?
At 8 feet off the ground, I was too high in the tree.
Yeah.
So I could see him moving through there, though. And then he ends up, the camera, when you film, if you don't have a tree arm, the camera normally sits either to your right or to your left, whatever hand you prefer to operate that camera with, and then down at almost waist level so that it's just easier to maneuver there. You don't want that thing up at your head level because it's too hard to move with your arm like that. You just want it to be able to naturally put your hand there and move, just like if you're playing a video game, you have your controller at your waist. So the camera is lower, and that's why you see that buck walk through what looks like a perfect shooting lane at like 25 yards. The problem is that with my naked eye, I could only see his legs.
People at home are screaming at their TV, shoot him!
Yeah.
Why isn't he, man? Yeah.
So, and I told Dad this when we were talking about this hunt. I don't think I've told either of you guys this yet, but I saw those does looking back. I saw that deer standing there, and through the leaves, I instantly said, I'm going to shoot that deer. It wasn't until after we had come back to our house and actually started taking pictures with that thing. Now we're like 8 hours after we've officially recovered the deer.
The next day.
That I realized he's a 10-point. I didn't even count the tines when I was in the tree hunting. None of that stuff was in my head because I was worrying about the camera, I was worrying about getting the shot on film, worrying about drawing my bow and trying to be quiet and be still and not get picked off. And the number of tines that he had didn't even register to me until almost 24 hours after I saw him for the first time.
I think focusing on all those other things as a person who films or hunts almost takes away from the anxiety that I feel when I'm about to shoot a big deer, and we'll get into it in my video, but this weekend I was so focused on we need to get Abby's bow out of her hand and all these things have to happen in order to have an arrow in my bow that I can shoot at this deer.
It's like it gives you something to focus on so that your attention doesn't go to the adrenaline rush of big antlers. Mm-hmm. So you can focus your energy somewhere else and not elevate your heart rate too much because you got to worry about doing the work to make sure the shot happens. So,
which the camera that you have filmed the last 2 bucks on by yourself is just completely asinine that you're even using that. That's incredible. I probably would have been
he hauls it to the stand in a Mack truck.
Basically. Like, that is not a self-filming camera. That's like a, hey, we're shooting a movie today camera.
Yeah, but I love that thing.
It is sweet. Yeah, it's a great camera. But
So that deer walks out, and he's slowly working his way down to the beans. And I had ranged prior to all of this stuff. That's the first thing I did when I sat down, was range spots, because I knew it was probably going to happen fast. I wasn't going to be able to hear the deer before I saw them, so I was going to have limited time to try to get a shot off. So I had ranged several spots, and where it looked like he was heading was going to be 35 yards. He would be slightly quartering away. I thought, chip shot, no problem. Except that when you're filming, there's obviously other things that go wrong, and on this particular hunt, just like Easton said a couple years ago when he killed his, something had to go wrong for things to work out. I actually said that in the interview in the tree before I started the hunt officially.
Did you quote me?
I did. So you got credit. There's no copyright violations or anything like that. It's all good.
MLA format.
Yeah.
Except that the tree arm creaked twice. And so as you're moving that thing, this is an older tree arm. It just hasn't been greased or whatever, I don't know, but it creaked a little bit, and he stopped and he looked. And
You didn't have to look high.
No, well, at the first time that he stopped, it just made a tiny little noise. And he stopped and looked towards me, but he couldn't see anything. I was covered in branches. I mean, I could hardly even see him through the trees. So he kept walking shortly after that, and I moved the camera, obviously, again, to follow him, and it creaks again, and he stops. And at this point, his ears are flitting everywhere. He's on red alert, and he knows something is not good. And I know this is not going to end well. So.
Yeah, and that's, oh, man. Yeah, when you had texted me, like, what had happened, I was like, these dang cameras just keep us from shooting big deer all the time. All the time. But curiosity killed the cat. That sucker ran out there and just couldn't take it and stopped.
I don't know what it was. I've watched the video back so many times. I can't pinpoint exactly why he stopped where he stopped, but so he was at 35 yards. He got nervous and decided, I had a wide frame in the camera, so I knew I wasn't going to have to touch it unless he just boogered out of there and took off a mile away. But he ran. I drew my bow back. You can see all this stuff in the video in the second angle, and he stops quartering dead away from me, probably a 45-degree quarter, at a spot that I had ranged previously right about 60 yards, because I knew that was probably going to be my max range. I shoot on my lunch break at work all the time, and just like you guys, I practice with field points and with broadheads out to 80 yards or more. So I knew I could probably make a 60-yard shot, assuming the deer didn't do something drastically abnormal. Like you can account for a little bit of duck. You know the arrow's got to take some time to get there and stuff, but he stopped at 60 yards, and I knew it was going to be a long shot, so I drew my bow, and I'm following him with my 60-yard pin as he's running out there. So I'm on him the whole time. He gets to 60, he stops, he turns and looks at me, and I didn't even think twice about it. Just let one fly at 60.
And you didn't either in the video. As soon as he stops, boom. Like, so you can you're not messing around when you were saying you were following, because as soon as he stopped, you could hear that you release.
Right there. So the other thing though is I did, man. And I don't know if that's what caused him to turn around and be like, oh, was that a deer? I don't know. I mean, I don't sound like a deer, but.
I think two things. I think, number one, there was a ton of deer in that field.
That's true.
So he probably felt a little more comfortable. That buck was right there with him pretty much.
He ran right to him.
And I often wonder, because I've heard Lee and Tiffany talk about this. I wonder sometimes if a property that gets hammered with pressure, they're not almost used to it. They talk about, like, they walk around and go through all the time. They want the deer to be used to them. And it's part of me is like, the landowner's back there every day.
Yeah.
There's guys hunting it all the time.
Yeah.
Maybe he was just like, oh, is it just the landowner driving his truck down the lane again? Like, let me check quick. But
I think naturally, they feel that immediate threat when he was at 35 yards, heard something abnormal, took off. He went probably a safe distance that he felt, I've distanced myself far enough away from the threat that I think it's safe to stop now.
Yeah.
And maybe just check it out, see what it was, and then kind of go from there.
So the end result is that he was a little further than 60, and he ducked right into my arrow. But the thing that I didn't account for was the duck and the wheeling away from me. So I think the shot still would have been a little bit forward, but it would have been up in the vitals instead of way down there in the brisket like I ended up. But it's because he ducked into the arrow and then started to quarter away even harder, which that takes a deer that's facing you broadside and turns and makes that actual angle of your shot a lot smaller.
Which is crazy, because you hear the juries or whoever, anyone that films their hunt for a long amount of time has at some point talked about a deer, ducking the string. And then slowing your video down, I was like, oh my gosh, it's incredible how that arrow was more than halfway to him before he even flinched.
Well, I'll tell you, because this is a beautiful thing about cameras if you know a little bit about math, but they film in a certain frame rate per second. That camera was filming at 30 frames per second. It took 38 frames from the time you can hear my bow go off to the time it reached the deer. So just over a second for that arrow to travel that distance. And guess how many 30ths of a second it took for him to duck?
Probably not very many.
10. And guess how far he ducked? His back ended up almost even with where his belly was when he first started. So he ducked in essentially a third of a second. He ducked his entire torso width. That's unbelievable.
You'll see that with my video, and that was a 35 on the nose shot. I ranged it 10 seconds before I released the arrow. He was at 35 yards.
Yep.
And you can see my lighted knock come into frame, and between the time that knock is in frame and the time the arrow hits him, he ducked a ton, and that was almost nearly half the distance of a shot.
That's why when I'm shooting my bow, I like to, number one, if you're new to hunting, you need to always hold low. Don't ever, in my personal opinion, don't ever hold for a double lung shot. You should be holding on the heart every time you shoot at a deer, especially if it's over 30 yards.
They're not going to jump up in the air. If anything, you're going to hit their heart, or they're going to duck right into it.
Or sight your bow in so you're shooting a little bit low. If you're shooting your bow and you're shooting a little bit low, I wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, I'm shooting low every time. That's probably a good thing.
Yeah. It's
crazy. Even at 20 yards.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. It's unreal. But yeah, he ducked a ton.
He did.
Which helped.
Well, and you talk about it in one of the interviews that you did in the truck. Hindsight's 20/20. There are a lot of people out there that don't think a 60-yard shot on a deer is ethical no matter what you do, and that's fine. They can have their opinions, but guys kill deer that far a lot. Often. Most shots are 20 to 30 yards, but I've been practicing so much, and that deer was so big, I didn't even hesitate in my mind. In the moment, it never even crossed my mind. I was like, if he stops anywhere near where I ranged, I'm going to let one fly, because I was confident in myself.
I would back anyone up, not just because you're my brother. I would back anyone up because that's hunting. Hunting is making game time decisions in the moment. You don't get to sit back and say, what should I do here? You get to make game time decisions, and guess what? Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't, and that's okay. That's just part of it. So I don't think that was wrong at all. Bow, if you practice that far, it can shoot that far. Your arrow doesn't just drop dead at 60 yards.
Right.
So if it's something that you are comfortable with, you have a 60-yard pin, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
There's people that would go out there without ever having shot their bow all summer long and take a 20-yard shot, and no one would think twice about it. They'd be like, oh, 20-yard shot, that's ethical. They haven't even shot their bow at 20 yards yet. So if you're out there shooting at 60, 70, 80 yards, I wouldn't say it's any less ethical than a guy who takes a 20-yard shot but hasn't even picked up his bow all summer.
Right. Well, it's funny, too, because I had told you that sending you into that spot, there's a good chance that's going to be a far shot. And you texted me on your lunch break that same day, your group at 50 yards, and you were stacking them in there. So it's not like you'd been practicing at 30 yards and he was out there. We were in there specifically training for that shot. Because we knew that it's probably going to be a far shot if they pop out where we think they are going to.
Well, and the other thing, too, about hunting, and this is, I guess, life in general, is that you can only control the things that you yourself are in control of. I can't control whether that deer ducks or not. I can't control whether that deer spooks or not. All I can control is how accurate I am shooting my bow at whatever distance I feel comfortable at. Yeah. And I took care of all that stuff. I controlled for all of those variables that I could.
So let's talk about the hit itself. This is where things get just bonkers.
Well, initially I thought I missed. I mean, the interview I do immediately after it, I thought I just missed the biggest deer of my life. And that's because I remember watching it happen real time, thinking I just missed in front of that deer. Then I watched the footage back and I thought, I missed that deer, but I missed that deer so close that when an arrow flies through the air, it flexes. That arrow flexed and hit his chest and deflected. And I was so heartbroken because it's like so close. Like,
Yep. Well, that's what's weird from my point of view too, because if you've hunted long enough, you almost train your ears to hear like impact. And when I was filming from my point of view, again, I had no idea that deer was even in the county. Like I could not see it, but I could hear obviously Jake's bow release. And I could hear instant, like I literally threw the camera down and it was like, you hit that deer. Like I heard impact.
He didn't hear my release. He heard the arrow let loose from my bow.
Right.
Just, I don't have a creaky old release or anything. I'm shooting a good one, but...
The release of the arrow, yeah. And I was like, man, I know that hit a deer. Like, I don't know if it was a good shot, but like I heard impact. And you're like, no, I missed. And I was like, dang it. But in the back of my mind, I was like, man. And then you had said, I think I may have actually like skimmed him. And so I'm picturing in my mind, you gave him a haircut, you skimmed it off his back, whatever. Yeah. That's what I'm picturing. I was like, okay, maybe that's what I heard.
Yeah.
So from there, obviously, we were super bummed. The buck that was out there with the deer that you shot popped back out like 10 minutes later. So I was like, that's a little odd. Like, I don't know. That just seemed weird. And he didn't. Like, maybe, I don't know. That just, to me, seemed interesting.
It seemed interesting to me too, but I chalked it up as that 8-point that you're talking about that came back into the field. He's just a 2-year-old 8-point. He probably has only seen a couple hundred in his life and has never had a close call. And he doesn't know the woods like that deer I shot at knows the woods. That deer's like, I'm not going anywhere near that field for the next 3 days. Right. That's what I chalked it up to in my head.
Well, it was interesting too because you were wanting to hunt there the next day, and we were talking about how boogered all the woods would be, and like every deer, there's probably over a dozen deer when you say, Jake, in that field.
Probably, yeah.
When you shot, they all picked their head up and looked your way, and then just like went back to eating. And I was like, what?
Well, and here's another. This is something else that I'm gonna pick on Corey a little bit in this one because he says that when beans start to turn yellow, they don't eat them, and that's not what we saw. We saw a sea of green and yellow, just like the color of the hat that I was wearing. And those deer were eating on those beans like they were going out of style. They were probably only eating the green ones, but just the fact that some of them were turning yellow didn't turn the entire deer herd away from that food source. That's why we continued to hunt it, because there was still the potential for them to come out and feed in those beans.
That whole topic just confuses me because I've seen deer not hit them, and I've seen deer obliterate them when they're yellow. And then late in the season, they destroy them. So it's like I don't know when they do or when they don't. But yeah, they were feeding them pretty heavily. But yeah, so at that point in time, the hunt wrapped up. I climbed down. I go to meet Jake, and this is where things just. And I feel bad because I didn't do a good enough job documenting this because we were so confused. Like, we were so, like, what is happening type deal, and I wish I would have done a better job. But I met up with Jake. Obviously, like we talked about, he did a hang and hunt, so he's pulling the stand down. I'm like, you know what, I'll save time so we can get to the truck, get out of here, try not to ruin anything else. I'll go get his arrow. I can see the lighted knockout in the field.
Well, actually, if you remember this, I had already pulled the stand and sticks down, and I was starting to strap the sticks to my stand and pack up all of my gear back into the bag. And you take off and start walking, and I was like, he's going to go get my arrow. Thanks, man. Like, I appreciate that, because I'm bummed.
Yeah. And I go out there, and, like, there's blood all over his arrow. And, like, there's blood instantly all over the ground. I'm like, okay. Just 10 minutes ago, we're talking about how he missed this deer. Like, what is going on?
Yeah, I got a text, and you're like, he hit this deer. And I'm like, what?
After I had been texting you that he missed.
I had heard he missed high, and then I was like, no, I think he like maybe skimmed him, and then it was like, no, he hit him.
But yeah, because I'm getting messages from Jake, and then I'm texting my buddies, and it's just like, yeah. But our phones are on like 2% at this point in time, so I'm like trying to Snapchat some close buddies, like, look at this, like, what's going on? And I come back to Jake, I'm like, dude, you hit this deer. But still in my mind, I'm still like, it's a flesh, you clipped him and he's bleeding. So
he'll bleed 50 yards, dry up, and never be seen again.
We've seen probably between all of us and our dads and our uncles, we've seen probably, I hate admitting this, but probably, 10 shoulder hit deer, maybe more.
Yeah.
And it's always great blood. You're like, yeah, he might die. And then you're like,
Well, that wound opens up because of the broadhead. And then as they run, that skin and the muscle starts to tighten up and it closes off that wound channel. So then there's no more external blood. We've seen it time and time again.
there was no part of me that was like, this is a dead deer. Like, not even a little bit.
No, and I texted you, and I was like, are you guys even going to go look? Because at this point, in my mind, I was still thinking he had grazed the deer, and it was barely bleeding. And I'm like, I'm going out there the next night. Is it worth even going in there and looking for this deer? Because where the deer ran was where they were all coming out of. So I was like, is it worth it? And then you ended up sending me pictures later, and I was like, oh, yeah, I would say it's worth it.
Well, and this too, we were of the same mindset because you went and you looked at the arrow, we packed up our stuff, and then we watched the footage again and decided, let's go back to the truck and really think about this. Mm-hmm. And I was of the opinion that where I saw that arrow hit him, there's no way that's a dead deer. No way. It's not even worth our time to go back and look. I'm like, I got to get up and go to work tomorrow morning. My family, my wife and my 2 kids were at my parents' house waiting on me. Like, we got to go get them to bed. Let's just leave. There's no way.
Yep. Which it just goes to show you have to follow that blood trail until either it dry. Like, you just have to keep going.
People say all the time about umpteen different things. You got to do your due diligence, And for whitetail deer, if you're a hunter, that whitetail deer deserves due diligence. Mm-hmm. Even if you miss him, you still should go up to where you think you were at and just make sure. Because after this, you never know.
You literally never know.
That's something I've learned is not one single hit is the same as the other. Like, you could hit a deer that you've seen that same exact shot 100 times and the deer is not to be found, and you might go in there and find yours in 50 yards because it might have been a quarter of an inch one way or another, and you got an artery.
Or the broadhead works different, or you got more penetration or less penetration that might have been better for the deer, or whatever.
Yep. So at this point, like Jake said, we made it back to the truck. We're trying to watch it on the viewfinder of the camera. We're still like, there's 0 chance this deer's dead. Our phones die at this point, so we're like, oh my God, like, are we going to stay down here? It's already 10 o'clock. Like, it's already 10 p.m. Like, what are we going to do? So our mindset was, let's just go follow the blood trail. I think I told you this. Let's just go follow it for like 50, 75 yards. It's going to dry up.
We'll follow it till it dries up.
Then we'll know. Like, then we can at least go home and get a good night's sleep because at least we'll know we did what we should do. So we started down that path, and the blood was like good, and it was like better. And we kept saying, let's just go 20 more yards. Let's just go 20 more yards. And that turned into like 800 yards, and this thing's like pouring.
Well, it was 1,000. It was 1,000 yards from start where the arrow impacted him. It was like a 987 yards or something like that from waypoints to where we determined that night at like 1:30 in the morning to say we could follow this deer into the next county for the next 24 hours on blood potentially. Let's just cut the chase and go home and get some sleep and regroup in the morning.
Yep. And it did start to dry up. And now, I think looking back, it was drying up because he lost so much.
Yeah, he was out of blood.
But at that point in time, we were almost like, you know what? Let's not push it any further. He was heading towards a different property. So we did elect to back out. We got home. It's like 2 in the morning. I finally get a hold of like Easton and Corey and some other guys like, hey, here's the blood we were finding. You know, phones were dead. What do you guys think? Type deal. Everybody obviously and their brother was asleep. I was trying to get a hold of guys with tracking dogs. I'm like, what am I doing? It's like 3 in the morning. Yeah, it's like they're not going to answer.
Those guys are a different breed though.
Yeah, true. But yeah, we go to sleep, get up the next morning. Jake's got to go to work. I just so happened to have a half day of work that day. So I was going to use it on the front half to go look for his deer.
Well, originally you were going to take it in the back half to go hunt.
Right, true.
And then this happened.
Moved it to the front half. So drove down there, got permission from the neighbor to go look. Long story short, Nick, the neighbor, one of the coolest dudes we've ever met, came out to come help me. So again, it's just me and Nick. Easton, it was Easton's birthday, so you were at your grandma's, right?
Yep.
So we start tracking this deer. The blood is pretty similar to what we left the night before, and we probably went 75 yards maybe, and we found the dang thing. Like, just saying that is unreal to me, because I literally was down there like, I had my work clothes. Like I was convinced I just needed to go have the peace of mind. Like I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't. So I wanted the peace of mind of like, all right, that blood trail dried up. There's nothing else. He's going to live, and I'm going to go to work.
And I wanted that peace of mind too. I just didn't have the vacation day scheduled. So right. I am, people say this in movies all the time, but I am literally eternally grateful for you for taking the time out of your day to do that for me.
I think that was Buzz Lightyear. I'm eternally grateful.
It might, yeah, the little green men that are in the...
It was so fun, and so I ended up FaceTiming Jake, and he knew. Like I could tell as soon as I FaceTimed, and he was like, "Oh my God, he's got this deer." Well, looking back, I wish like heck. Obviously, I was so rattled. I wish I would have FaceTimed you and been like, "Hey man, here's the blood we're finding. Like, what do you think?" And then like pan to the deer laying there. But
well, I knew you were on the trail, and I knew that you had Nick's help, and. Like I had been debating, we had been talking about it all morning, even before you got down there. Like, should I just submit for a half a day and just take the afternoon to meet you guys down there? And that was at like 10:45. We had made that decision. I submitted the vacation day. Like, I'm going to meet you down there for half the day just to finish the track job. And what time did you call me? 11:05?
Yeah, so, pretty quick after.
I knew after being on the phone with you to talk about taking the time off to go and finish the track job, I knew that the only reason why I would get a phone call from you was if you found him.
Yep. And we did. And it goes to show you, back to the hit, you just never know. Ultimately, it was an artery, right?
It was the brachial artery that runs essentially from the heart down almost into the brisket and then follows the front legs down the front side of those front legs.
Which is so, you just said it about, one of you guys did, about being just like an inch or two off. Like I've heard of guys shooting at deer that are facing them, like aiming for the brisket and not finding them. And it's like crazy to think that they're missing that, but you can hit it, quartering away. It's just, it's nuts. Well, I wouldn't recommend aiming there.
No, I don't either, but it'll kill a deer. And the thing that's crazy about it to me, like you said when we started this whole discussion, was that the stars aligned. That's exactly what happened, because it's not like an artery is the size of my fist. The artery is less than the size of my pinky. And 1.25 inch fixed blade broadhead just happened to slice that thing in half. It, like I said, ordained by God. You cannot explain it any other way.
Yep. It was that deer's time. It was your time to put your tag around it. But from there, I mean, we were just like, and even still, I feel like I didn't do a good job videoing because I was so like floored. I was like, what just happened? Like we went from, dang it, like this is how we're starting our season off, to like, this is how we're starting our season off.
You started with a miss, and then you were like, oh, okay, we wounded one. That's even better. And then we actually found a stud.
Yeah. And he wasn't touched by coyotes yet. He was like, it just all was like,
it was
how?
surreal.
Yeah, how?
And I need to say this because you might think that I'm not excited about this in the video, because one, I'm not like a super exuberantly like excitable person, but I also was like, I must be dreaming. Like, this cannot be real. I walked up there and I looked at this thing and I thought, there's no way that I'm actually standing here right now looking down at this thing. I didn't have words. I mean, like, I don't even know if I breathed for 2 minutes there, like, as I'm trying to process this.
I did the same thing. I looked at Nick like 4 times and I was like, that's him, right? And he was like, yeah. I was like, that is him, right? Like, you were like looking at him. Like,
well, you can hear Nick in the video. He goes, as far as I know, because he didn't walk up there and see that thing. It's to him, it's a dead deer. It's on the trail where the blood is. It's got to be him.
Right.
But you don't know until you get up there, and it just is unbelievable. Everything about that hunt is unbelievable.
Which is so fun about hunting, because like we sat there opening day and did a tailgate talk, or second day of the season, and did a tailgate talk about our Kentucky trip, and we talked about Ohio, like, I hope we get to film, a tailgate talk about a giant deer, and it's like, and then like you just, when your days in front of that, you don't know what to expect, and then like to look back and see what's happened to us the last week, it's like, holy cow, this is so awesome.
That's an awesome point, is like when I think about the season that's ahead of me, I always wonder, like, what's going to happen? Am I even going to shoot a buck? Last year I didn't shoot a deer. And I'm like, am I going to shoot a buck? Whatever. And then looking back, you're like, I would have never expected any of that stuff to happen to me. That's like one of those weird things about hunting. Yeah, that's just unique to it.
Well, literally at any moment, the whole world can flip upside down and things can change, either for the good or for the better, or both at the same time, which I think is what happened to us. It was change for the better, unexpected deer at a hanging hunt that I never thought was actually going to happen, to I missed, to I hit him, to I wounded him, to, well, we found him, and here's a stud deer in my hands.
Well, it's fun too because, and not to like toot your horn, but like,
you can toot my horn.
like good people do things the right way, really truly care about hunting, would never even think about doing something, illegal or anything like that when it comes to hunting. So like, you'd like to think that's how it always should be, right? Like you come out on top because you live life the right way, but it's not always like that. But when it does go your way, you're like, man, this is so worth it.
You and I had this discussion in Kentucky after Corey had that close call with that nice buck, is with hunting, you never feel like you're winning. Mm-hmm. You always feel like, man, we had a close call. Man, we wounded one. We didn't find him. We're flat out not seeing deer. You never feel like you're on the winning side. And so when you look back and you actually have won one of those small victories, or in this case, a 150-inch victory, close to it, you're like, heck yeah. So it pays off.
I was thinking about that just the other day, actually, when you had talked to me about that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and on that note too, we didn't score him. A lot of people have asked us if we measured him. We didn't. We don't really care at all. I have no idea. Maybe 40s, close to 50, somewhere in there. But yeah, literally don't care. So, and I'm super pumped for you. That was an awesome deer. The last thing if we have time, was going to talk about our game warden situation.
Yeah, that's crazy. So I'll start. Ohio has had traditionally a pretty old school way to check in your deer. They upscaled from an actual physical location to being able to do it over the phone and online, which there's controversy about that. But now they have an app. Well, I didn't know about the app.
Me either.
I've always just gone on my phone and pulled up the internet app and typed in odnr.com and gone to their game check settings. Never had an issue. That's how I've done it ever since they started doing it online. Well, that's what I did. And online, there are, I think, 5 options. Antlered with 1, antlered with shed, antlered with both, and then antlerless. So I've never seen those options before. I think most of the time it's antlerless, button buck. And then you have something like antlered with 3-inch antlers or less to account for like spikes and stuff, because you could shoot them at 40 yards and not know that they're bucks. And then just a regular antlered deer. So these options were foreign to me. In my head, I'm thinking, well, the bottom one is clearly for a doe. I didn't shoot a doe. So the rest of these have to be for bucks. Maybe they're tracking how many bucks get shot at the end of the year with shed antlers, or that only have one side, or broken tines, or whatever. I'm thinking in my head like they're doing research or something. So I selected antlered with both. Checked in the deer, wrote down the confirmation number, no big deal. Well, we're standing at the end of the driveway here, and we had taken pictures out around my house. I'm not sure if someone called the DNR or if he was just cruising around, but the county DNR officer rolls up and stops at the end of the driveway, gets out, and is like, that's a nice buck, like, congrats, where'd you shoot that thing at? We chatted about it for a little bit, and then I handed him my tag because he asked for it.
Super cool dude.
He was, super nice guy. And he looked at it and handed it back to me. He says, all right, dude, well, where are you going to take it to get it processed? And I told him there's a place right down the road that we just found out about. It's close. I'm going to try there. He said, I heard good things about it. So we hop in the truck. He drives off, and we head to go and turn this thing over to the processors. And in walks this game warden, the same guy.
Well, I think I word for word was like, hey, long time no see. Yeah. Like, what's up?
And I thought, this cannot be good. And he passed me on the back and says, hey, I just wanted to let you know, you checked that deer in wrong. You checked it in as a doe. And I'm going to just go into your account and change that for you because it's a big buck. Obviously, you must have done that by mistake because it's not like you shot a dinky little buck and wanted to check it in as a doe so that you could go out and hunt and shoot another big buck. Like, I'm assuming that you're going to follow the rules and obey regulations. And I thought in my head, I did not check that thing in as a doe. There's no way. So he says, where did you do it at? And I told him I did online. And he said, well, we have an app. I was like, no, that's cool. I didn't know that. I'll download the app now. But luckily, I had purchased another tag for an antlerless deer. So as he's standing there talking to the other guys that were in this shop, I pulled up my phone and I went to the game check process and started that process with my old tag, the one that I tagged my buck with. It wouldn't let me use it because I had already completed that tag. So I started the process with this other doe tag and get to that same section where it asks me to report what kind of deer it is, and those options show up again. And I showed it to you, and you were like, dude, show that to him.
Mm-hmm. It's faulty.
Yeah.
It's poor. Yeah.
So I showed it to him, and he's like, what? I didn't know that. I'll have to tell Ohio Department of Natural Resources that that's what's going on. And then you said, why don't you try flipping your phone? So I rotated the phone from vertical, like everyone uses their phone, to horizontal, like you would watch a movie or something on your phone. And then those options that I couldn't scroll over to see what was left there, those options just automatically populate, and it shows that I selected antlered with antlers 3 inches or less, which in Ohio they count that as a doe, an antlerless buck. And then you can go out and shoot another buck if you want to. And so if you're in Ohio and you have that problem, or if you're in another state, just double check all that stuff, because there's some wonky things that go on in the internet, and if they're setting that system up to reflect in an app, but then you use that system outside the app, it could change things.
I think you lucked out the fact that you shot a huge deer. If it would have been some scrubby little buck, he may have thought you were trying to pull a fast one, tag that as, a doe or both antlers being less than 3 inches, and go out and shoot.
Well, the other interesting thing is that the people that we took the buck to get it processed, they said, you're lucky this is a new DNR officer. Like the guy that we had in years past, he would have damn near put cuffs on you for that violation.
Which to me, I was actually upset because that was even a thing. I'm not good with technology, so I always check it in with the phone, like the automated system. So I just press numbers, and it's press 1 to make sure you said the right thing. So that's how I always do it. So when you were showing me the website, that's the first time I've ever even seen it. But I was like, this is a problem. This is something that you guys need to fix. Yeah. And it was cool because he was like, holy cow, I didn't know that. We need to figure out how to get this changed, because it was almost like it was meant for a computer. Yep. And that software was on a phone. So it was shrunk.
It didn't scale right to a mobile phone. Yeah.
So if anything, we obviously, if you guys know us well enough by now, hopefully, we want to be super transparent with everything. So just if you're doing that this year, be conscious of it and learn from our mistake, I guess you could call it. Make sure you're not in the same boat. But he was super understanding, super cool, realized, holy cow, that was a problem on, basically on our end, and corrected it for us, which was awesome. And we really appreciated that, because it's something we would never do, obviously. So.
Well, and we're advocating now for the app. Well, I didn't know that there was an app. Did you know there was an app? Did you know? You did before the season.
I knew there was an app, but I hadn't downloaded it.
So download that app, because it's going to make things, there's still some issues and some bugs in it, but we'll get into that with Easton's video, but it's going to make things a lot simpler if everyone just gets on the app. So here we are advocating for the app. The ODNR has an app. You go to their website. I don't think you can get it directly from the App Store. You go to their website, and they've got a section where it says to download the app.
I got it from the Apple.
You did?
Store. Okay. Yes. Yep. And it's
How
super
did you
cool.
search for that?
I think I just typed in Ohio DNR.
Okay.
Yep. And then it's super cool. They have maps to public land and resources that you would never think. It's not just an online check-in app. There's all kinds of resources to find places to hunt, fish, whatever. It's definitely worth checking out. Yeah.
So go get the app, and then you won't have any issues.
I think that was a cool and appropriate cap to everything that had happened the 24 hours prior with your hunt, because we talked about how right place, right time, it was in God's plans, and that kind of also was in a weird way, because the processors were wanting to talk to a game warden to get the rules and regs and all that stuff, and him coming out there for that reason allowed them to talk to him about some things. So it was another one of those everything happens for a reason type deal, which is cool. But I think that's it. That was probably our longest one, but hopefully you guys, can pair this with the actual video if you watch that, and kind of get some more inside looks, some behind the scenes.
Act like you're cracking the beer and listening to a good hunt story. That's basically what this was.
There you go. So other than that, the next one we're going to talk about is Easton's, which is another wild hunt and another giant deer. So we hope you guys enjoyed this one, and we'll see you on the next one.
Blood coming up from their mouth. Sorry if that gets a little bit grueling. That yours did not. Right. So congrats, dude.
Pause for a big buck call.
Dude, that thing is a slammer.